So I want you to picture this. You're staring down an armed inmate.
Wow, okay. Jumping right into it.
Yeah, we are. So they are gripping this like makeshift shank, right? And they're holding it directly to a prison guard's throat.
That is basically a nightmare scenario.
Completely.
Yeah.
The air is just thick, everyone is sweating, and after hours of these screaming negotiations, the inmate finally looks at you and says, "Yes, we surrender."
And you probably feel this massive wave of relief, right?
Oh, exactly. You breathe this massive sigh of relief. You think you've won. You think the crisis is over.
Because they said the magic word.
Right? They said yes. But what you don't know, what you couldn't possibly realize in that exact moment of triumph, is that the word yes is about to, it's about to almost get that guard maimed.
And that right there, that is the most dangerous cognitive blind spot in human interaction.
Really, the word yes.
Oh, absolutely. We're culturally conditioned to view the word yes as a finish line. The moment we hear an affirmative agreement, our brain just releases this huge rush of dopamine.
Right, the tension just dissipates.
Exactly. But the reality of behavioral psychology dictates something entirely different. The agreement itself is basically a mirage if it lacks the structural architecture of execution.
And that is our mission for you today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
We are taking a sledgehammer to the pedestal that society has placed the word yes on. Because whether you are, trying to talk down an armed hostage taker or close $1 million software acquisition or just, get a deadbeat client to finally pay an invoice, we are going to completely rewire how you navigate these interactions.
It's a fundamental shift in how we communicate.
It really is. We're going to cure you of this dangerous obsession with getting to yes, because an agreement is completely worthless without a bulletproof, concrete plan for implementation.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is actually applied. Today, we are equipping you with the precise psychological tools to navigate a world that is just brimming with aggressive negotiators, hidden decision makers, and counterfeit promises.
Counterfeit promises, I like that.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And the neurological triggers that cause a guerrilla kidnapper in a jungle to back down, they are the exact same triggers that cause a corporate executive to authorize a wire transfer.
That is wild to think about.
It is, but we are analyzing the fundamental operating system of the human brain here.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really expose why a naked yes is a trap, we need to return to that terrifying scene I mentioned. The St. Martin Parish Prison in Louisiana.
Right, the hostage situation.
Yeah. So a highly volatile mix of inmates has taken the warden and several of his staff hostage. They are armed with these crude blades. And the atmosphere is just explosive because there is no organized leadership among the hostage takers.
Which is so dangerous. It's just raw, unfiltered panic at that point.
Exactly.
And that disorganized panic is a negotiator's worst nightmare. When there is no clear hierarchy on the opposing side, you aren't just negotiating an outcome, right? You are trying to establish order out of sheer chaos.
Well, how do you even approach that?
Well, the negotiators on the outside, they start analyzing the psychological baseline of the inmates, and they realize something critical. The inmates are operating purely out of a reactive survival instinct.
They're not, like, masterminds with a grand plan.
Exactly. They don't actually want to escalate to murder. They just feel backed into a corner and simply want the chaos to end.
But there is a massive structural barrier to that end, right?
Yeah.
Because the inmates are running this terrifying cost-benefit analysis in their heads.
Oh, right. They know what happens next.
Yeah, they know that if they simply drop their weapons and walk out, well, the moment the cameras are off and they are back in the custody of the guards they just held hostage, they're going to face severe physical retaliation.
And that fear of a brutal beating is completely overriding their desire to surrender.
So the negotiators step in and act as what we call decision architects.
I love that term, decision architects.
It makes sense, right? Because they realize that demanding a yes to surrender is futile unless they build a mechanism that mathematically guarantees the inmate's safety.
So they have to engineer a process.
Exactly. They design this highly elaborate, multi-stage surrender ritual involving walkie-talkies. The strategy is elegant, really. One inmate takes a radio, walks out of the facility, and passes through 3 separate, heavily monitored perimeters of multi-agency law enforcement.
Right. It's a physical demonstration of safe passage. They walk past the federal agents, past the SWAT teams, and finally get loaded into a paddy wagon to be driven to an entirely different local jail facility.
To get them completely away from the guards they held hostage.
Exactly. And once that first inmate is safely locked up away from the prison guards, he uses his walkie-talkie to call his accomplices back inside the prison and give the all clear.
And only then do the rest of the inmates surrender.
See, they engineered the how. Gaining the yes to end the siege was merely the entry fee to the negotiation. Designing the execution, dynamically adapting the verbal and physical elements of the deal to ensure it actually happens, that is the actual work.
So the inmates agree. The plan goes into motion. The first inmate walks out holding his radio. He clears the first perimeter.
So far, so good.
Right. He clears the second. He makes it all the way to the outer transport zone. But then, a massive variable completely disrupts the architecture.
Oh no, what happened?
A random SWAT officer who is stationed at the transport vehicle, and this guy has been completely left out of the tactical briefing regarding the walkie-talkie ritual, by the way. He sees an inmate approaching with a piece of communication equipment.
Oh, I see where this is going. His training just kicks in.
Exactly. He views the radio as a security threat. So he immediately confiscates it, throws the inmate into the transport van, and completely severs the only lifeline guaranteeing the safety of the hostages inside the prison.
That is just catastrophic.
It really is, because back inside, the inmates are staring at their radio.
Yeah.
Minutes tick by, just silence.
And the psychological snap there is instantaneous. In their minds, the silence is absolute proof that their friend is currently being beaten to a pulp.
Their worst fears validated.
Exactly. So they grab the radio, scream at the negotiators that it was a trap, and threaten to start amputating the fingers of the hostages immediately.
It's terrifying. And all because the execution failed, the yes just evaporated. From the inmate's perspective, the negotiators breached the contract.
Which sets off a frantic, literal life-and-death scavenger hunt on the outside.
Yeah, the negotiators are sprinting through the staging area, just screaming for the radio. And a full, agonizing 15 minutes later, this SWAT officer strolls up, entirely proud of himself for seizing contraband.
He had no idea.
Completely oblivious to the fact that his lack of situational awareness almost cost a hostage a limb. So the negotiators grab the radio, they race to the jail, and finally get the inmate to make the call. The crisis is narrowly averted.
The overarching lesson here is just profound. You do not get your profits or your saved lives upon agreement. You only get them upon implementation.
The agreement is just the start.
Right. Success is not the hostage taker saying, we have a deal. Success is the freed hostage actually walking out the door.
It's like planning a massive $50,000 wedding. You can spend 12 months sending out beautiful invitations, carefully curating a guest list, and getting everyone to RSVP, yes.
You sure you got the heck out?
But if you neglect to actually hire a caterer or book the officiant, that yes on the RSVP card is fundamentally useless. You haven't organized a wedding at all. You just gathered a room full of starving people to stare at an empty altar.
That is a perfect analogy. The RSVP means absolutely nothing without the mechanism of the event.
Right.
And that is precisely the cognitive shift we need to make. We must obsess over the mechanism. And the primary tool we use to design that mechanism to secure the how brings us to this concept of listener's judo.
Listener's judo. I love the sound of that.
It's incredibly powerful. It involves a strategic deployment of the calibrated question. But to really analyze the mechanics of this, we have to look at a harrowing case study from the jungles of Ecuador.
Okay, let's get into it. We're looking at the survival of Jose and Julie. They are an American couple who operated an ecotourism business near the Colombian border.
Right, a very remote area.
Very remote. In 2003, they are ambushed on a remote road by armed members of a rebel group. Jose is dragged out of their vehicle at gunpoint and marched into the dense jungle.
Just a horrific situation.
And days later, the captors deliver their demand. They want $5 million for Jose's life.
It is the ultimate asymmetrical power dynamic. The kidnappers hold literally all the cards, and the family has, maybe a fraction of the requested resources.
Certainly a fraction.
Right. And the standard instinct in a negotiation like this is either to aggressively refuse the demand because it's impossible, or to just break down and beg for mercy.
Which is totally understandable.
It is, but both of those responses fail because they trigger the captor's dominance instincts. They reinforce that the captor is in charge.
So what do? Well, the FBI gets involved, and they instruct Julie to execute a radically counterintuitive strategy. She is told to never say no, to never argue the price, but to answer every single demand with a calibrated question, starting with the words how or what.
And this is the essence of listener's judo. In physical judo, you don't block a heavyweight opponent's punch with your own brute force, right?
You'd get crushed.
Exactly. You use their weight and momentum against them to manipulate their balance. Calibrated questions achieve this cognitively. When the kidnapper demands $5 million and Julie responds with a calm, deferential, "How am I supposed to do that?" she is performing a psychological redirection.
Okay, so let's break down how this played out. The kidnapper calls, demanding the money. Julie asks, how do I know Jose is alive?
And the rebel negotiator is totally thrown off.
Yeah. He physically has to hike back into the jungle camp to consult his superiors because he doesn't have an immediate script for that question.
Because she didn't say yes or no, she gave him a problem.
Right. And when they call back to push the money again, she asks, we don't have that kind of wealth. How can we raise that much?
Notice the underlying mechanism there. By asking how, she is granting the kidnapper the illusion of control. She is implicitly asking for their expertise to solve her problem.
So it makes them feel powerful.
Yes, but more importantly, it triggers a very deep evolutionary human need for reciprocity. It actually engages the kidnapper's prefrontal cortex, forcing them to expend their own cognitive energy to devise a solution to the impossible puzzle they just created.
It stalls the entire operation. She actually drives the ransom down from $5 million to $16,500 purely through logistical exhaustion.
Which is incredible.
And when they finally demand that fractional amount, she hits them again. She says, how can I pay you immediately when I have to sell my cars and trucks to get the cash?
Just endlessly stretching the timeline.
Exactly. She stretches the timeline out for so many weeks that the rebel camp actually begins to fracture. They slowly abandon the camp until Jose is left with a single teenage guard, allowing him to escape into the jungle during a torrential rainstorm.
He survived because those calibrated questions bought him the operational window to self-rescue. And, a crucial rule within this framework is understanding what words not to use.
Oh, like what?
You must entirely eliminate the word why from your negotiation vocabulary.
Really, why feels like such a natural follow-up, though. If someone makes an insane demand, asking, why do you want that? Seems totally logical.
It may seem logical, but neurologically, it is disastrous. In every language and across all cultures, the word why is universally processed by the amygdala as an accusation.
As an accusation, just the word itself.
Just the word. If I ask you, why did you make that decision? Your brain instantly detects a threat to your autonomy. You become defensive. You brace for an argument.
I mean, yeah, I guess I would feel a little defensive.
Right. But if I ask, what caused you to make that decision? Or how does that decision solve the problem? The accusatory sting is completely removed. It frames the interaction as a collaborative exploration rather than an interrogation.
Okay, I see the difference, but I have to challenge the core premise of this, though.
Go for it.
If I am sitting across from a ruthless corporate raider or even just a hostile contractor working on my house, and I continuously respond to their demands by basically throwing my hands up and saying, how am I supposed to do that? Doesn't that inherently signal weakness?
That's a common concern.
Doesn't projecting incompetence make a predator want to exploit you even more?
It's a vital distinction to make here. You are not projecting incompetence. You are weaponizing a concept called forced empathy.
Forced empathy.
Yes, and the delivery is absolutely everything. It cannot be whiny or frantic. Delivered with a calm, deferential tone, how am I supposed to do that, forces the counterpart to mentally inhabit your operational reality.
But forced empathy only works if the other person actually possesses empathy for you. Right. A cartel kidnapper or a vicious CEO doesn't care about my feelings or my operational reality. Why would they care enough to solve my problem?
Because it isn't actually about altruism. It's a profoundly selfish mechanism on their part. The kidnapper wants the ransom money. The CEO wants the finalized contract.
So they have an incentive.
Exactly. By asking how, you are effectively placing a massive boulder on the path to their reward. You are saying, I want to give you what you want, but I physically cannot navigate this obstacle. If you want your reward, you have to show me the way.
Oh, wow.
It shifts the cognitive burden entirely onto them. They aren't helping you because they like you. They are solving your logistical problem because it is the literally only way they get paid.
That reframes the entire dynamic for me. It's like a gentle, graceful way to say no without ever triggering the defensive friction of the word itself. You are guiding the counterpart to realize the impossibility of their own demand. Let's look at how this applies beyond life or death survival. Because the inability to secure the how is basically the cancer that eats everyday business profits.
So true. A signed contract is utterly meaningless without rigorous implementation. If you force an agreement down a counterpart's throat through leverage or sheer exhaustion, they will inevitably find a passive-aggressive way to fail at implementing it.
Look at the case of Kelly. She's an accounting consultant caught in a nightmare scenario that almost every freelancer has faced at some point.
We've all been there.
Right, so she is owed a massive sum of money by a corporate client who just refuses to pay the invoices. She keeps taking their calls, doing minor additional work in quote-unquote good faith, terrified that if she aggressively demands her money, the client will get defensive, fire her, and she'll never see a dime.
And meanwhile, she's falling behind on her own mortgage.
Exactly. The power dynamic feels entirely lopsided. The client has all the money and the leverage.
So she adopts a strategy of tactical patience based on listeners' judo. She stops doing free work and simply waits.
Just radio silence.
Right. And eventually the client hits a crisis and calls her, demanding she run a new batch of financial reports immediately.
Of course they do.
But instead of blowing up about the unpaid bills, Kelly stays perfectly calm and softly asks, "I would love to run those reports for you, but how am I supposed to do that?"
It's a masterstroke. She signals complete willingness to collaborate, but drops that massive unspoken boulder of the unpaid invoices directly onto the path of his new request.
Exactly. The client is suddenly forced to confront the reality that his accounting emergency cannot be solved until her financial emergency is solved. He realizes he has to clear the backlog to get her labor.
And he authorizes the payment immediately. Right?
He does. She gets her money without ever making a single sweat.
But ensuring a deal actually moves forward requires more than just one good question. How do we lock in the architecture of a complex agreement? Like, how do we make sure it sticks?
You utilize two golden questions designed to force the counterpart to define the metrics of success themselves. When you are hammering out a deal, you must ask, how will we know we're on track? And how will we address things if we find we're off track?
So what does this all mean? Like, why are those specific phrasing structures so powerful?
Because it forces them to write the roadmap in their own words. People will fiercely defend a plan if they believe they authored it. When they answer those two questions, you carefully summarize their operational plan back to them until they look at you and say the magic words. That's right.
Okay, let's drill into that phrase, because there is a massive psychological chasm between a counterpart saying, "That's right," and them saying, "You're right."
Oh, it is a huge difference. The distinction between those two phrases dictates the survival of a deal. When someone says that's right, they're experiencing a cognitive epiphany. They feel deeply understood.
They're on the same page.
Right. They're acknowledging a shared objective reality, and they are emotionally bought into the path forward.
But when they say, "You're right,"
When they say you're right, it is a total disaster. You're right is a polite, socially acceptable dismissal. It means they acknowledge the logical validity of your argument, but they have absolutely zero personal investment in changing their behavior.
it's just lip service.
It is the phrase we use when we want the other person to just stop talking.
It's the equivalent of a teenager nodding along while their parent lectures them about cleaning their room. They agree with the logic, sure, but that room is never getting cleaned.
Spot on.
And there's another phrase that signals impending doom for implementation. "I'll try." When I hear "I'll try" in a business setting, it acts like an email quarantine zone.
A quarantine zone, what do you mean?
Yeah, think about it. You hit send on an aggressive demand or a complex request. You don't get a bounce back error message, so your brain assumes the message was delivered, accepted, and is being processed.
Right, you feel a false sense of security.
It's exactly. But in
Yeah.
reality, the company's firewall secretly intercepted your email, deemed it dangerous or annoying, and dumped it into a hidden quarantine void. Nobody's ever going to read it.
Correct.
"I'll try" is the verbal equivalent of that firewall.
That is fascinating.
It intercepts your demand without causing an immediate error message, giving you the illusion of agreement while secretly sending your request straight to the trash.
That is a highly accurate behavioral model. "I'll try" is an automated defense mechanism against commitment. When you hear "you're right" or "I'll try," your internal alarm bell should be deafening.
So what do you do when you hear those?
You must immediately pivot back to calibrated how questions. You do not let them leave the room until they define the terms of successful implementation using "that's right."
So we've secured the how with the person sitting across the desk. We've bypassed the quarantine zone. But here is the terrifying variable that kills countless agreements. Decisions are rarely made in a vacuum. We have to analyze the ghost at the table.
The realm of level 2 players. The invisible committee that wields the actual power to kill your deal.
Let's look at the debriefing of the Ecuador kidnapping to see this in action. After Jose escapes and makes it back to the United States, an FBI negotiator sits down with him in his living room.
And the FBI agent is secretly pretty anxious.
Right. Because he wants to know if their radical calibrated question strategy actually worked, or if Jose just got incredibly lucky with that rainstorm. So he asks Jose what was happening behind the scenes at the rebel camp every time Julie asked, "How am I supposed to do that?"
And Jose's perspective completely validates the strategy on a level the negotiators hadn't even fully anticipated.
Jose explains that the rebel designated to handle the phone calls was supposed to just stay in the nearby town and dictate terms. But because Julie kept hitting him with these complex logistical questions like, how do I know he's alive? How can we transport the funds? The negotiator couldn't authorize the answers himself.
He didn't have the authority.
Exactly. The questions forced him to hike all the way back into the deep jungle camp. The entire faction of kidnappers would have to halt their operations, sit down, and hold massive internal committee meetings just to draft a response to Julie.
It forced unprecedented internal coordination among the bad actors. It wasn't merely a stalling tactic. It inadvertently ensured that all the level 2 players within the rebel group were perfectly aligned.
So everyone had a say.
Right. The constant internal debate prevented a fractured scenario where a rogue, impatient kidnapper decides to execute the hostage while the negotiator is stuck in town.
Now compare that forced alignment to a massive corporate catastrophe in Florida. A negotiation training firm is trying to close a lucrative six-figure deal with a major corporation. The lead negotiators are on a conference call with the CEO and the head of human resources.
And the call is a total home run.
Absolute home run. They get complete, enthusiastic buy-in from the highest authority in the company. They start popping champagne, and then, at the absolute last minute, as the contracts are being drafted, the deal just evaporates.
It vanished because they failed to identify the deal killer. They eventually discovered that the head of the specific division scheduled to receive the negotiation training aggressively blocked the contract.
And he wasn't even on the executive phone calls.
Exactly. But he possessed enough internal political capital to veto the initiative.
Because he felt his territory was threatened. The implication that his division needed outside training wounded his pride. A six-figure corporate initiative was burned to the ground purely over a bruised ego.
This is the reality of level 2 players. Deal makers, the people who enthusiastically say yes, are often significantly less powerful than deal killers.
Deal killers just have veto power.
Right. Deal killers are motivated by status, ego protection, and fear of change. If you do not unearth the motivations of the invisible committee whispering in the CEO's ear, your agreement is built on sand.
So we have to use our calibrated questions to smoke out the ghosts. Things like, how does this affect everybody else? Or how on board is the rest of your team? But I see a massive social friction point here.
What's that?
Well, if I am sitting across from a powerful, egocentric CEO, and I start digging for hidden decision makers, aren't I directly insulting the person in front of me? If I ask, who else needs to approve this? I am fundamentally implying that I don't believe they possess the ultimate authority to sign the check. I'm challenging their status.
You are absolutely right, which is why phrasing is everything. A direct challenge to their authority will trigger a defensive shutdown. You have to uncover the level 2 players while simultaneously stroking the ego of the person in the room.
How do you do that?
You use a calibrated question like, what do your colleagues see as their main challenges in this area?
So you're essentially flattering their collaborative nature to expose their lack of unilateral power.
Precisely. The phrasing assumes they are an enlightened, team-oriented leader who deeply values the perspectives of their subordinates. It allows them to maintain their alpha status while freely handing you the roadmap to the internal politics.
That's incredibly subtle.
It is. If the negotiators in the Florida deal had asked the CEO, how do we ensure the managers receiving the training are fully integrated into this process? The CEO likely would have brought the division head into the fold early, neutralizing the bruised ego before it could kill the contract.
It's about mapping the subsurface emotional landscape. But hidden players are only one threat. What do we do when the person sitting right in front of us isn't hiding anything, but is instead weaponizing overt, terrifying aggression?
That requires transitioning to a defensive posture we call Tai Chi negotiation.
And the case study for this is pure nightmare fuel. In 2004, Alistair Unglingswan, living in the Philippines, hails a taxi in Manila. He falls asleep in the back seat. When he regains consciousness, he is bound in chains in a dark room.
The taxi driver operated a side hustle as a violent kidnapper. He literally kept an open bottle of ether in the front seat of his cab to chemically subdue unsuspecting passengers.
It's horrifying. So the kidnapper contacts Alistair's brother, Aaron. The demands are relentless and laced with extreme manipulative aggression. The kidnapper demands daily cash drops just to, quote-unquote, keep Alistair's comfortable while he investigates the family's total net worth.
He's bleeding them dry.
Yeah, and he leverages sheer terror. He explicitly threatens to harvest Alistair's organs and sell them to syndicates in Saudi Arabia. He offers to amputate Alistair's ear and courier the video to the family to prove his resolve.
This is a calculated flood of cortisol. The kidnapper is trying to induce a state of profound psychological panic in Aaron, hoping the family will rapidly liquidate all their assets just to stop the terrifying threats.
So Aaron works with tactical advisors who give him a strategy that feels entirely backward given the circumstances. They tell him to treat this organ-harvesting monster with extreme, groveling deference.
Which goes against every instinct you have.
Right. They arm Aaron with a barrage of how and what questions designed purely to act as a psychological drag parachute.
And this is the Tai Chi concept. In martial arts, Tai Chi emphasizes absorbing and redirecting an opponent's kinetic energy. If a heavyweight throws a haymaker, you don't break your own arm trying to block it. You step aside and let their own momentum throw them off balance.
Okay, so how does that apply verbally?
When a counterpart is screaming threats, arguing back provides them with the friction they need to stay energized.
So the kidnapper screams about cutting off an ear, and Aaron, keeping his voice trembling but calm, just asks, "How do we know if we pay you that you won't hurt Alistair anyway?"
He's sidestepping the punch.
Exactly. The kidnapper demands a meeting time, and Aaron launches into a labyrinth of complex logistical questions about traffic, bank withdrawal limits, and drop-off coordinates.
Aaron is weaponizing a psychological phenomenon called ego depletion. The human brain has a finite amount of cognitive energy available for aggressive posturing.
So they basically run out of gas.
Precisely. By forcing the kidnapper to continuously pivot from screaming threats to solving complex, granular logistical puzzles, Aaron is rapidly draining the kidnapper's cognitive battery.
It's like a verbal rope-a-dope strategy. You lean against the ropes, cover up, and let the opponent completely exhaust themselves, throwing wild punches against your calibrated questions.
The beauty of the Tai Chi approach is that treating an aggressive jerk with deference grants you the hidden power to be fiercely assertive. You are repeatedly shutting down their timeline and saying no, but the deferential packaging prevents their ego from recognizing the refusal.
And the culmination of this strategy in Manila exposes a massive vulnerability in the kidnapper. After days of grinding the kidnapper down over minuscule token cash drops, Aaron hits him with a beautifully calibrated timeline question. He asks, "When we run out of money, what will happen?"
And the kidnapper, completely exhausted by the protracted logistical haggling and perhaps unconsciously beginning to view Aaron as a collaborative partner rather than adversary, pauses and simply says, "It will be all right."
Just like that. The monster offering to sell organs just promised not to hurt the hostage. He was manipulated into making a commitment to safety because his aggressive drive had been completely neutralized by the how questions.
And crucially, this massive delay allowed the Philippine National Police the time they needed to geolocate the cellular signals and execute a raid, rescuing Alistair.
The kidnapper leaped his true intentions. He let his guard down and revealed the subsurface reality of the negotiation, which perfectly transitions us into the science of reading the subtext.
This is where it gets really analytical.
Yeah, how do we decode the subconscious signals of a counterpart to know if they are lying or if they lack the authority they claim to have? Here is where it gets really interesting, because we have three foundational behavioral psychology concepts to analyze.
The 738-55 rule, the Pinocchio effect, and pronoun usage.
Let's start with the 738-55 rule. It was developed by UCLA psychology professor Albert Mehrabian.
Mehrabian's research fundamentally altered how we understand human communication. He quantified how we process meaning when a speaker's message is ambiguous or emotionally charged, and he found that a mere 7% of the message is derived from the literal words spoken.
7%. That means 93% of our communication has absolutely nothing to do with the dictionary.
Precisely. 38% of the meaning is carried by the vocal tone, the pitch, the cadence, the inflection. And a staggering 55% is dictated by body language and facial microexpressions.
Why is it skewed so heavily toward the nonverbal?
There is an evolutionary basis for this. Complex spoken language is a relatively recent development in human evolution. For millions of years, our mammalian ancestors relied entirely on postural dominance and vocal pitch to detect threats and gauge intent. Our brains are hardwired to prioritize nonverbal data because it is much harder to fake.
So if a CEO looks at a contract, crosses his arms, drops his vocal pitch, and mumbles, "Yes, this looks great," our primal threat detection system instantly flags the incongruence. The 7% says yes, but the 93% is screaming no.
Exactly. In a negotiation, behavioral incongruence is a blaring siren that the agreement is counterfeit. When you spot that mismatch, you do not ignore it to preserve social harmony.
So you call them out.
You use a technique called labeling to drag the friction into the light. You gently observe, "I heard you say yes, but it seemed like there was some hesitation in your voice."
But doesn't calling them out like that make them defensive?
Counterintuitively, it usually builds trust. When you gently label an incongruence, you demonstrate that you are paying deep, empathetic attention to them as a human being, not just a mechanism to get a signature. It invites them to voice their hidden objection before it metastasizes into a blown deal later.
Okay, so that decodes the nonverbal. But what about the 7%? How do the words themselves betray a liar? That brings us to Harvard Business School professor Deepak Malhotra and his research on the Pinocchio effect.
Malhotra analyzed the linguistic patterns of deception. And while a liar's nose doesn't grow, their word count undeniably does. Malhotra discovered that liars use significantly more words and dramatically more complex sentence structures than truth-tellers.
Why does the brain do that? Is it just panic?
It is a manifestation of cognitive load. Telling the truth is cognitively simple. You are just recalling an episodic memory. But fabricating a false reality requires immense processing power.
Right, you have to build a whole world.
You have to invent the lie, monitor the listener's reaction, and constantly adjust the narrative to maintain internal consistency. The liar's brain goes into overdrive, overcompensating with excessive, baffling detail because they are terrified of leaving a silence where suspicion might grow.
It's like the verbal diarrhea of the guilty.
Basically, yes. But Malhotra found an even more precise indicator: pronouns. Liars heavily overuse third-person pronouns. They rely on him, her, it, one, they, and their, while actively avoiding first-person pronouns like I or me.
Because they don't want to be attached to the lie.
Exactly. It is an unconscious attempt to mitigate cognitive dissonance. Deep down, the liar knows they are deceiving you. To reduce the psychological discomfort of that deception, their brain linguistically attempts to put distance between their core identity and the lie. They take themselves out of the sentence.
Which flows perfectly into how we can use pronoun analysis to detect who actually holds the power in a room. A person's use of pronouns offers a direct X-ray into their relative authority.
And the general rule of thumb here is a paradox. The more a negotiator uses first-person pronouns, I want my company, my requirements, the less actual power they wield.
It seems completely backward. You would assume the ultimate decision-maker would dominate the conversation with I.
People who lack authority feel a profound insecurity about their status. They constantly use I to artificially inflate their perceived importance in the room. Conversely, a truly powerful decision-maker, the actual apex predator in the negotiation, actively avoids first-person pronouns.
So what do they use?
They use we, they, and the board. They do this strategically to deflect personal responsibility onto an unseen committee, which allows them to ruthlessly reject proposals without taking personal blame and gives them the flexibility to alter terms later.
Oh, the Manila kidnapper is a perfect example of this. Early in the standoff, he constantly referred to we and they. The FBI profilers initially assumed Aaron was dealing with a sophisticated, multi-member kidnapping syndicate.
But he wasn't, was he?
No, it turned out the guy was essentially a lone operator. He was using plural pronouns to project the terrifying weight of a cartel, masking his own isolated vulnerability.
Because humans are so adept at these deceptions, we need a rigorous defensive protocol to test any agreement. This is called the rule of three.
We're conditioned by pushy salespeople and relentless telemarketers to dispense the counterfeit yes. We just say yes to make the friction stop. The rule of three is designed to shatter that counterfeit agreement.
The protocol requires you to get the counterpart to agree to the exact same proposition 3 distinct times within a single conversation. It is incredibly difficult for the human brain to maintain a fabricated conviction under varying angles of scrutiny.
But practically speaking, if I sit in a boardroom and ask a vendor the exact same question 3 times in 10 minutes, they're going to feel interrogated. They're going to get annoyed and walk out.
Which is why the art lies in varying the angle of attack. You never ask the question the same way twice. Step 1 is simply securing the initial commitment. That is your first yes.
Right. So, will you deliver the software by Q3? Yes.
Exactly. Step 2 is an empathetic summary. You summarize their operational reality and the nuances of the agreement back to them until they validate it with the phrase we discussed earlier. That's right.
So, given your engineering bottlenecks, delivering by Q3 means prioritizing this over your internal updates. And they reply, that's right.
Yes. And finally, step 3 is a calibrated implementation question. You ask, if we hit a critical bug in August, how do we ensure the Q3 timeline stays intact?
Oh, I see. So they don't even realize they've confirmed the deal 3 times. The conversation just feels like a natural, rigorous exploration of the logistics. But underneath, you are stress testing the architecture of their yes from 3 different psychological vectors, exposing any hesitation or nonverbal leakage.
Up to this point, we have armed ourselves with defensive mechanisms. We know how to stall with judo, disarm aggression with tai chi, and spot counterfeit agreements. But negotiation isn't just about survival. It's about proactively designing better outcomes.
Right. How do we transition from defense to offense? How do we aggressively negotiate terms without burning the relationship to the ground? This brings us to the psychological power of humanizing the deal and the absolute masterpiece technique of the multi-step no.
The foundation of offensive negotiation is establishing your own humanity in the mind of the counterpart.
Let's talk about the Chris discount. The source material shares 2 incredible stories about an FBI negotiator using his own first name to short-circuit hostility. The first takes place in a crowded, noisy bar in Kansas.
Setting the scene.
Yeah. The negotiator spots a single empty stool. As he moves to sit down, the massive, heavily intoxicated man sitting next to it turns, glares at him, and snarls, "Don't even think about it." The negotiator pauses and asks, "Why?" And the guy responds, "Because I'll kick your ass."
A classic, highly volatile display of territorial aggression.
Right. The negotiator's colleagues are tensing up, ready for a physical altercation. But the negotiator simply holds out his hand, looks the guy in the eye, and says in a calm, friendly voice, "My name is Chris." And the aggressive man just freezes.
The hostility just evaporates.
Instantly. It turned out the man was a Vietnam veteran having an incredibly dark, emotional day, surrounded by happy people, and his only coping mechanism was projecting violence. But the moment the negotiator offered his name, he stopped being a faceless target and became a human being.
It forces a neurological reset. When we are aggressive, we objectify our opponents. By introducing yourself, you force their brain to process you as an individual, which triggers deep-seated social conditioning regarding politeness and empathy.
And he leverages this exact same neurological glitch for financial gain later on. He's at a retail outlet mall buying some shirts. The cashier asks if he wants to sign up for their corporate loyalty program. He asks if joining comes with a discount on the shirts. She says no.
Standard retail interaction.
But instead of arguing, he leans in, smiles, and asks, "My name is Chris. What's the Chris discount?"
It's a playful disruption of the standard retail script.
It totally is. She bursts out laughing. She turns to her manager, who overheard the interaction.
Yeah.
The manager is so amused by the friendly audacity that he manually overrides the register and gives him 10% off. The discount didn't exist. It was created purely out of likability.
People inherently want to assist people they perceive as likable and human. This foundation of manufactured empathy is the launchpad for the most sophisticated offensive strategy we have, the multi-step no.
This is the holy grail.
Yeah.
It is the tactical process of forcing your counterpart to literally bid against themselves, dropping their own price, without you ever putting a counteroffer on the table.
It sounds like magic, but it's just psychological.
To dissect this, we look at the bitter saga of Joaquin and Bruno. They are 2 partners in a cannabis grow shop franchise in Spain.
And their partnership is experiencing a catastrophic breakdown. Joaquin wants to expand the business through aggressive volume discounts. Bruno is highly conservative and demands they maintain high margins to take cash out of the business.
And then it gets personal.
The philosophical divide turns toxic when Joaquin discovers that Bruno's wife has been secretly siphoning inventory and selling it on a private eBay store.
It's an absolute mess of betrayal. In the midst of a screaming match, Bruno finally snaps and declares he wants to sell his 46% stake in the company and walk away.
So they have to figure out a buyout.
Right. Joaquin consults with his brother, Jesus Bueno, who is highly trained in these exact negotiation tactics. They use empathetic listening to get Bruno talking, and Bruno's anger causes him to leak a massive piece of financial leverage.
Bruno reveals that the bank has audited their original €20,000 startup loan and is threatening to call the note due or drastically spike the interest rate.
So Bruno isn't just angry, he is financially terrified. He needs liquidity fast. Joaquin and Jesus analyze the books and determine that €23,000 is their absolute maximum target price to buy Bruno out.
But Joaquin gets cocky.
He does. He abandons the strategy, calls Bruno, and bluntly offers €23,000, adding that he thinks the offer is very fair.
And using the word fair in that context is a catastrophic error. By framing his lowball offer as fair, Joaquin implicitly accuses Bruno of being unfair if he rejects it. It triggers massive ego defense.
Bruno hangs up in a rage. 2 days later, Joaquin receives an email from an aggressive, professional financial advisor hired by Bruno. The advisor demands exactly €30,812.
Notice the highly specific, non-round number. The advisor is a professional signaling that this number is the result of rigid mathematical calculation, not arbitrary haggling. Joaquin's blunder has fortified the opposition.
Jesus steps in, takes the cue board, and initiates the multi-step. No. I visualize this strategy as walking your counterpart down a very gentle, velvet-lined staircase of refusal.
I like that image.
Every step lets them down softly, preserving their dignity while firmly closing the door on their demands. The architecture consists of 4 distinct, graduated steps of saying no, without ever bluntly using the word.
The psychology of each step is meticulously calibrated. Step 1 is our foundational judo move. How am I supposed to do that?
It sets the boundary while begging for their collaboration.
Exactly. Step 2 increases the firmness while injecting heavy flattery. Your offer is very generous. I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me.
So you're building them up while turning them down.
The word generous acts as an ego trap. It flatters their self-image, making them want to act reasonably to maintain that positive label. The apology softens the rejection.
Step 3 shifts the focus to your own helplessness. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I just can't do that.
This step triggers the counterpart's empathy by emphasizing your inability to perform rather than your unwillingness to agree.
And step 4, the absolute floor of the staircase. Delivered with a calm, downward vocal inflection to signal finality. Let's look at how Jesus and Joaquin executed this staircase via email to break the advisor. They received the demand for €30,812.
Instead of arguing the valuation, they deploy step 2. They reply, "The price you offered is very fair, and I certainly wish that I could afford it. Bruno has worked very hard. I am very sorry, but wish you the best of luck."
They offer zero money. They just validate Bruno's hard work, apologize, and politely threaten to walk away.
And it triggers a panic response. The very next day, the advisor emails back, spontaneously lowering the demand to €28,346. Bruno has just bid against himself purely out of fear of losing the deal.
So Joaquin and Jesus hit him with step 3. Thank you for your offer. You were generous to reduce the price. I really wish that I could pay you this amount, but I am sincere in that I cannot afford this. I am in the middle of a divorce, and I just cannot come up with that type of money.
They inject highly personal vulnerability, the divorce, to amplify the empathy and solidify their posture of helplessness.
It works again. The advisor drops the price to €25,000. Joaquin is ecstatic. He wants to take it. But Jesus forces him to hold the line and execute the final step. They write one last email. Thank you again for the generous offer. Unfortunately, no one is willing to lend me the money, not even my mother. In the end, I can offer you €23,567. I wish you the best in your decision.
This is the kill shot. They finally put a number on the table, but they adopt the advisor's tactic. 23,567 is a highly specific, unrounded number that screams absolute bottom-of-the-barrel finality. They reiterate their total financial exhaustion.
Within an hour, the advisor replies and accepts the €23,567. They use the staircase of refusal to drag Bruno down from nearly €31,000 to just above their exact target price. They let his own desperation combine with their gentle, unyielding nose do all the heavy lifting. It is a breathtaking demonstration of subsurface manipulation.
It perfectly encapsulates the entire philosophy we've explored today. A negotiation is never actually about the literal words being spoken or the numbers on a spreadsheet. It is a fluid, volatile playing field of subsurface emotional and psychological needs. You can only craft a durable agreement by visualizing and actively modifying those invisible emotional currents.
And that brings us right back to the core truth we started with, the absolute non-negotiable necessity of the how. An unexecuted yes is nothing but a comforting illusion. It is a walkie-talkie surrender plan blown apart by a clueless officer. It is a massive corporate contract torpedoed by a fragile executive ego. I want to thank you, our listener, for joining us on this intense deep dive into the hidden machinery of human interaction.
If there is a single foundational principle you take away from this analysis, it is this. When you find yourself in a high-stakes conflict, your instinct will be to argue, to push back, to exert force. Suppress that instinct. Your greatest tactical weapon is weaponized curiosity. Use calibrated questions to map the invisible landscape. Force your counterpart to expend their energy solving your problems.
Be the architect of the execution. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative scenario to mull over. We've spent this entire hour analyzing how to use listeners' judo, calibrated how questions, and ego depletion to disarm aggressive opponents and extract concessions. We know how the system works against an untrained mind. But what happens to the psychological space when two absolute masters of listeners' judo sit down across the table from one another? If both negotiators are exclusively asking calibrated how questions, relentlessly reflecting the cognitive burden back and forth, inviting the other to solve the puzzle, who actually ends up steering the ship? It's a fascinating paradox. Keep questioning the subsurface reality. Until next time, remember, getting to yes is just the beginning. The real power is in the how.